We gotta get everybody's in
Did you want to have it open? Did you YouTube link? No. Okay. Okay, you probably just record it and then just take the video and then post it. Yeah. Okay. That's what we'll do. Okay, guys, sorry for that delay. We are going to just simply record it and post it to YouTube tomorrow. So we can begin when we are ready.
John, you are muted.
Start that again. Got muted at some point by someone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Welcome to the February 9th, 2022 BAR Large Virtual Meeting. My name is John Robinson, and I'll be serving as the chairman this afternoon and early evening. The other board members present this afternoon are Jay White, who will be recusing from agenda item number 7. Luda Subchuck will be recusing from agenda items 1, 2, and 6. James Matters, who will be recusing from agenda item number 3. City staff present this evening are Tory Parrish and Lawrence Courtney. The order of the meeting will be as follows. There will first be an introduction and overview of the project by city staff to the board and for the public. This will be followed by the applicant's presentation, which shall have a 10-minute time limit with extensions granted by the chair if necessary, and any questions of the applicant by board or staff. Any and all presenters for the applicant should clearly state their name for the record. People affiliated with the project application, be they owners, developers, designers, or consultants, should speak during this portion rather than in any later period. This will then be followed by written public comment. Written comments are due on noon the business day before the meeting. They have been transmitted to the board members in the case of this meeting. Unless determined by the chairman to the contrary, these written comments will not be read aloud during the meeting, but they will be incorporated into our deliberations. This is followed by public comment. There's a 2-minute time limit per person, or with reasonable extensions as granted by the chair. The applicant does not respond to individual public comments made during this period. Again, anyone making a public comment should clearly state their name and address for the record. Public comment period is followed by city staff comments and recommendations. The applicant then has a response, clarification, or rebuttal period to the public comment and city staff comments and recommendations. 5-minute time limit applies to this portion of the proceedings that can be extended by the chair. At that point, the applicant Applicant again takes a seat and only speaks if called upon by the board with a question or response to a board or staff inquiry. This is followed by board discussion and a potential vote. The applicant presentation and public comment period is closed. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising their hand and waiting to be called upon, but otherwise may only speak if asked a question by a board member. I would note as a procedural matter, agenda item number 3, 1142 Martian Drive demolition has been deferred by the applicant. This is a reminder to please turn off all cell phones and potentially disruptive devices. This is a reminder that in coming before the BAR, applicants or the public must limit their comments to architecture only. Comments related to zoning, parking, traffic, lot coverage, or livability concerns are not the purview of this board and may not be voiced here. Further protocol. Please note the recent updates to public participation, beginning with the September 22nd, 2021 meeting and all meetings, including this current meeting. The deadline for written comments is 12 p.m. on Monday, the business day before the, Tuesday, the business day before the meeting. The deadline to speak is 12 p.m. the day of the meeting. Written comments are received by the board in advance of any meeting and will be acknowledged into the record and summarized. If this is a concern, you're encouraged to sign up to speak at the meeting. If you are making public comment, you may do so in one of the following methods. In doing so, you must provide your name, address, telephone number, meeting date at which you wish to speak, and project number. You can complete the citizen participation form at innovate.charleston-sc.gov or call 843-724-3765 or mail comments in a timely fashion to the Department of Planning, Preservation, and Sustainability at number 2 George Street, Charleston 29401. Additional meeting protocol. The staff controls the PowerPoint presentation that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the application deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants simply need to ask the staff to which slide they wish to advance. Applicant staff and board members are required to give their names whenever speaking. Video and microphone has been disabled for all attendees. Attendees, as opposed to board members or staff, will only be given capabilities to speak when they're called upon during the public comment period. Chat and Q&A functions have been disabled for everyone on Zoom. Additional protocol related to public comment. The applicants, meaning all team members and the public, have been required to register, indicate the project they wish to comment on, and submit any documents in advance of the meeting. Just as at an in-person meeting, all applications heard today are part of the public meeting format. If you have registered and will speak during the public comment portion of the meeting, you will need to state your name and address for the record. Those members of the public that are registered will be called upon in order by project. Staff will call on the registered members of the public to speak for each project. Unregistered members of the public who raise their hand will not be called on. Written comments have been received by the board in advance and will be summarized where appropriate. Additional protocol related to the board. Board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and their vote on a particular motion. Each member, when voting, should respond yay in favor or nay not in favor. The chair shall reread the motion verbatim, and the board member making the motion should correct the chair if I have not reread it in an accurate manner. If a board member needs to recuse, he or she will temporarily be removed from the meeting and placed back in the meeting at the start of the next agenda item. If the board needs to go into executive session, they will call into a separate conference line, and all video and audio on Zoom will temporarily be turned off until we are ready to re-enter the regular meeting. And with that, we'll begin our agenda. Ms. Parrish, what is agenda item number 1 this evening?
Agenda item number 1 is 26 and 28 Cumberland Street. This request is the final approval of partial demolition of rear walls as previously approved by BAR March 23rd, 2016, and requesting for additional walls to be removed. This is also with involving 28 Cumberland. That request is final approval for demolition of non-historic building and removal of non-historic roof as previously approved by BAR March 23rd, 2016. This one's in the French Quarter. 26 Cumberland was constructed prior to 1944, 28 Cumberland constructed prior to 1884, and this is in the Old and Historic District. Regarding context, we've got an aerial for you here with the two buildings in the red box there. And then some street images. This is looking 26 is right there with the Martian Building, and 28 is the yellow building to the left. A little bit closer image of 26 Cumberland. And then this is looking east on Cumberland. And looking west. And then we've got a couple of Sanborns, which you'll also see some Sanborns in the applicant's presentation. 1884, showing 26 Cumberland there, and then the 1955 shows both. All right, with this one, we've got Mr. Eddie Bello and Mr. Artemis Zeltov. I just promoted them both to panelists. Sorry about that. I'll be a second. Okay. There we go.
I went away for a minute. Okay, so can everybody hear me? This is Eddie Bello.
We can. Mr. Bello, you have the floor when you're ready.
Okay, all right, well, I will be very brief. So most of this was approved, as Tori said, back in 2016. We're asking for a little additional walls, a little bit more removed to be removed from the rear of 26 Cumberland, which is the Martian Building. A couple things to point out. We saw a couple of board members out there yesterday on site. The Martian Building, almost all of, I would say that the majority, if not all of the historic fabric of that building is on its front facade. It's a very simple building, and we're not altering that in any way. And the majority of what we're removing from that building is at the rear. Actually, all of what we're removing is at the rear, and then most of that is from a 1950s. A good bit of that's from the 1950s addition. The other two buildings, again, as BAR staff said, the 1980 structure, I don't see that being any discussion. And then the other building at 28 is just a non-historic roof, which we all saw yesterday. So I can answer any questions, but I think it's fairly straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bello, and you ably walked us through it on site yesterday. All right, any public comment on this?
We do have public comment on this one. We'll have Miss Erin Minigan. Erin, if you'll give me a second, I'll get you promoted here.
Good afternoon, Tori. I'm actually signed up for the next item.
Oops, you are correct. We'll leave you hanging there. All right, that appears to be all the public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. City staff comments or recommendations?
Okay. Number one, at 26 Cumberland, the approval has lapsed. The proposed additional walls for removal include an approximate 24-foot section at the west and an approximate 20-foot section at the east, which incorporate the portion built between 1944 and 1955, and a rear portion built prior to 1944. In reviewing the proposed demolition of these additional walls, staff finds that no character defining features are included. And number two, at 28 Cumberland, the application has not changed from the previous approval. This is simply a lapsed approval. And three, any historic materials or building fabric that can be salvaged should be. We're recommending final approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you. Mr. Bello, any response?
No, I don't have any response.
Okay, we'll move to a board discussion and a vote.
I reviewed this on site yesterday and am sadly all too familiar with what this building once was. So I'm glad that the historic portions are being saved, and I agree with staff's recommendation.
I had the opportunity to be at the site visit and agree with city staff comments and recommendations. And thank you again to Mr. Bello for a thorough explanation of what the project was.
Mr. Chairman, I went by the site today and agree also. And I would make a motion for final approval with board and staff comments.
Mr. Metters, your motion, as I understand it, is a motion for final approval of demolition incorporating board and staff comments. Did I correctly restate that?
Yes, sir.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Metters' motion, Mr. White's second. I'll proceed to run down the roll. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this matter?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White,
Yay, in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. All right. Thank you, Mr. Bello.
Okay, thank
To
you.
the presenters. And it's coming right back up with 26 and 28 Cumberland Street. Walk us through agenda item number 2, Ms. Parrish.
This one again is 26 and 28 Cumberland. This request is for conceptual approval for the construction of a new multifamily building on a property having facades along Cumberland, State, and Lingard Streets. The new building incorporates existing historic building along Cumberland Street. French Quarter, Height District 3.5, Old and Historic District. Just to remind you, the context, this is the larger site, including the 2 buildings that you just reviewed. It has frontage on all 3 streets. And then again, the context looking from Cumberland Street into the site. And then looking east and west. We'll have Mr. Bello with this one also.
Okay.
Mr.
All
Bello, when ready.
Yes. Well, first, thank you for the last approval. Also, again, I have with us here in our office, Artemi Zeltov, who's the project architect, and our client is also on the line, John Pannoni with Landmark Partners. This is a fairly complex site. I'm going to go as quickly as I can to not take so long. Maybe I can use some of the time that I didn't use on the last application to add to this one.
I'll mark the time at the 10-minute mark, and I'm sure if we need an
All
extension.
right, I'll go as quickly as I can. I'll skip over some stuff, and if you have questions, we can go through it that way. All right, so next slide. I think we briefly touched on the history. I think most people know that this part of the city was very industrial, very working class. It's 1 block from the very active waterfront on East Bay Street. And of course, there's trains that went through here. And so the site had a coal yard, warehouses, small dwelling units, tenements. So it's always been sort of that working class neighborhood, very different from areas just a few blocks south. So that's something we were drawn to. Next slide. Skip over this one. I think everybody knows where it is. Let's skip over this one. Next slide, please. Okay, so contextually, we do have some historic buildings that we are working with and responding to. Really on this one, the bottom right is probably the most important one. This is looking east on Cumberland. That yellow building is part of our project. We're not changing anything with that historic building other than repairs and in-kind work, but that just shows you the streetscape. Next slide. Again, just showing the views around the site. I'll talk about the Martian Building at the top right, sort of last. The bottom right shows, that empty parking lot. I think most people are familiar with. It's interesting. We have this big parking lot in the middle of the city. That's where the bulk of our building is going to go. And then just to the north of that, right to the right, is the new Luttrell Building Hotel. Next slide. Just some other views. Again, just showing the parking lot, the new Luttrell Building there below it. And then, as Ms. Parrish said, we are touching 3 streets, and they're all a bit different. To the right there, those are all on Lingard Street, which is almost all new. Actually, it is all new construction. Very tall hotel buildings on the north side, and then Tommy Condon's 1-story non-historic structure on the west of our site. Next slide. Inspirational images. So real quick, we did look at how Charleston buildings handle the corner, especially larger buildings, how they address the corner. One Broad and the Wagoner Building there on the bottom. Those are fairly bold, strong corners, and we like that approach. The top right building is just a building we liked in Soho that shows sort of a rhythm, a very simple rhythm of masonry with a very clean rhythm behind it of glazing. And then the picture on the left is the Crest Building. And again, I'll talk about Martian in a minute. Martian is an Art Deco building. The Crest Building is a great, beautiful building that we have in Charleston. And we really like some of the Art Deco detailing of, or just a detailing of how those windows, you see those recesses around the frames of the windows. And we like that panel detail in between the head and sills of the vertical windows. The last thing I wanted to point out that I think is interesting, if you look at the Wagner building, that's the one on the bottom. That's at the corner of Trad, and I think that's Queen. We see this a lot in Charleston. You'll see a very formal, more decorated street side on one street, and then it turns and there's a different expression. It's very warehouse style. I mean, it was a warehouse, so we weren't copying that. But I just think as we show you our building, we tried to, not quite as dramatic as this, but we tried to let the facades respond a little bit more to the streets that they were on as we designed it. So next slide. And again, we've shown this to everyone, but there's a very strong tradition of how you handle corners and different at the street level, and that's you sort of clip the corner and have a column. So we wanted to bring that in. Next slide. And then last week, we really took a hard look at the Martian Building. It's a very humble building, but it has, and it's a small scale, but it has a great presence. It's got a stepping of its facade that you see here. The parapet's a little bit taller. The street level is forward, and then it steps back. And then next slide, there is a good bit, again, only on this one facade, but it's a good bit of little interesting deco detailing that we pulled into our design. We didn't want a neo-traditional Art Deco building, but we want to kind of bring some of that into our new building. Okay, next slide. So again, this is a fairly complex site. We've got historic buildings that we need to be sensitive to and respond to well. We've got 3 streets, Cumberland, State, and Lingard, that we, they're all a little bit different that we've got to respond to. And then, as is with all projects in Charleston, just about, we got to figure out how to handle the cars. And so we've got to bring those in and park them in a sensitive way. And so looking at the site plan, so the Martian Building is the one right there in the middle in pink. And the first thing we did was, on either side of the Martian Building, we created open space. Very intentionally, we pulled a bit. Remember, we could bring the building up. We could have the new building all the way up on the street there, but we pushed it back on either side so that you would get that volume, even though it's a small building. So you'd get that volume of that historic building there. To the left of that on the sheet, we put the drive right up against that pre-1888 or pre-1884 coal shed, so that historic wall and that front of that will always be exposed. So right away, we took away property and opened it up because we thought volumetrically that's the most important thing to do there. This is also a good area to see how the Martian Building steps, how it steps back a little bit at the street. Of course, at the corner, we have pulled it to the corner, and we've got a clipped corner. And then we put on Lingard Street an exit. Again, we pulled it on Cumberland. We've got the street, the garage entrance pretty far back, so it's not interacting with pedestrians. And then on Lingard, we put most of our service stuff, the switch gear and transformer stuff like that. Next slide. So the upper floors, this is all residential on the upper floors. I think the main thing here is to see the pink areas are all outdoor space. A big component of this for our client was to have a lot of outdoor space for the residents that live here. Next slide. It's more or less the same. Next slide. All right, so this is the 4th floor. So this is a 3.5-story district. We have pulled most of the building back. We put the height more in the center of the block and pulled it back from the edge. On the north side there, that pink area is sort of a club room for the residents with a pool deck. So that whole north side there, where that is all kind of open. Next slide. All right, so here's the building from standing on Cumberland and looking at the State Street facade. So a couple things. First, we intentionally wanted this building to read as a 3-story building. When we worked on the Luttrell building, the one to the right, we intentionally put all the height right up on State. We wanted that to be very prominent there. Here, this is a bigger building. It wraps the block. We wanted to bring that scale down a little bit. And so you see the line that I think that's Lawrence. You moving the hand around. That's good. We aligned a little bit with some of the elements on the building, the Luttrell building, and then we intentionally pushed that top floor back. That again, that provides really nice terraces for those folks, but also it lets that read less as an extension of the building and more as a rooftop element. Next slide. Trying to go fast, y'all. There's a lot to go over. Skip this one. Next slide. That's just a pure elevation. Okay, so just to talk about the materials a little bit, this will be white brick, as white as we can get. And again, a little different handling, a little different treatment of how the brick would be detailed than the Luttrell next door. We want it to be rich like the Luttrell is, but not quite as layered. And so we do have some detailing, but we want this to be a little bit lighter than that building. Next slide, there's a little bit of a zoom in here. Okay, so you can see, if you look at the metal panels in between the windows, the floor level there, we've got some fluting that is pulled from the Martian Building at the top level, which I don't know how much detail you'll see from the street, but it's also got some of that fluting. It'll be stucco up there and a little bit of metal panel. Next slide, please. Okay, so and as you turn the corner, we've got a lot of porches, and we put those on the south side, which is where porches go, but also that's where the view is. We did not think it would make a lot of sense and really be a very good. Would not address the street well if we put the porches on the State Street side. So as you go down the building, we broke that rhythm a little bit, and we have a steel frame that sits inside the brick sort of colonnade there. And the idea was these are very open and fairly expressive. Next slide. And these are just enlarged views of how those two portions of this facade work, State on the right and Cumberland on the left. Next slide. This just shows how some of the massing works. Again, we pulled the building up to the street, the corner, and then as we get to the Martian Building, we push it way back. Next slide. Just some other aerials. I think the key one on this one is to the one on the bottom is of Lingard and showing how that pool works. And the deck up there really is the main thing. Next slide. This is, you can skip this, but we're just showing how we calculated the top floor. We are asking for a little bit more than 50%. I can't remember if it's 14% more, but because we're working around the existing buildings, we're pushing it back, putting the height, and we're having the building read as a 3-story building. Those are our main arguments, I think, for architectural merit. Next slide. Just a section which is required. Next slide. This is an overall streetscape. You'd never see this, but it shows it's a big building. Next slide. Just a close up. Next slide. I think this shows the building a little better. Okay, so like I said, we really focused on the Martian Building from the start. This is the front door to the residence. So people living here will come and go right through that front door. Well, that was the first move we did. A couple of other things. Again, you can see now on either side of this building how we pushed back. The porches are pushed back, and then the wall itself, the main wall, is pushed back even further. So it really gives, in our mind, lets that Martian Building have a presence. Another thing that we did, instead of having just this sort of big blank continuous wall behind this building, sort of ignoring it, we wanted to address that building. So we changed the language a little bit on center and let it be a little bit more in keeping with that Art Deco language. It's not, super, it doesn't copy it, but it speaks to it a little bit. So that was very intentional. Next slide. This shows you also how that top floor is not really a huge presence. This just shows what I was talking about before, how we pulled the parking or the entrance to the parking way back. You'll see that historic building to the left always. So again, this shows really how much you'll see of these historic buildings. And as big as this building is, about how we really worked hard not to overpower it, both of them. Next slide. Just a view down Cumberland. Okay, next slide. Trying to go fast, y'all. This is a view you can't really see. This is a section, sort of a site section, if you're standing on Church looking towards, looking east, but it does show you how the building, sort of the massing is pushed towards the middle. Next slide. These two views, the one on the left is an interior view of that courtyard. Again, this will be really minimally visible, but wanted to explain how that works. And then the building to the image to the right is also, that's the eastern, I guess it's the western facade. If you look to east, that's that view. You cannot see that from the street. Next slide. And then this is Lingard Street. And so we treated this a little bit differently. We wanted to frame that pool deck up there, so this didn't feel like a deck. So we extended some of the language from below up there. And again, this is where we end up having some of our utilitarian things on the street, garage, and the, like I said, the switchgear and transformer. Next slide. I think I'm almost done now. Just a pure elevation of Lingard. Next slide. This is streetscape. The one above is what's across the street from us, which is almost like one continuous 4-story building. And then our building, you can see it there sort of popping up on the bottom right. Next slide. Cumberland Street. Cumberland's a little more low scale. Our building steps down a little bit as you get to that street. Next slide. You can see it a little bit here. So this is State Street. Again, we are stepping down somewhat from the Luttrell building on the street. Reads more as a 3-story building and then a 4. And of course, the massing is, in our opinion, works well with that street. Next slide. I think this is almost it. Yeah. So just to wrap up, this is the corner view. We do have a column that comes down. We wanted that corner to feel a little bit lighter, so we didn't want that to be masonry. And this shows, again, how that top floor would read as a secondary element. And then the last one, I think, is just a night view. Yes. Okay, so that was the super fast version. If y'all have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bello. Live public comment, Tori.
We have Miss Erin Minigan.
Ms. Minigan, you have the floor.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for meeting with us this week and discussing this proposal. Generally, we feel very positively about this project and think it presents a high-quality, compatible design that responds well to the complicated site and sensitive historic context. In particular, we feel setting back the 4th floor creates a nice transition of height toward the neighborhood, and the architectural language of the State Street elevation is strong. However, we do feel the corner element needs continued study as the eroded treatment feels a bit weak for this prominent location. As depicted in the precedent examples, a bit more traditional of an approach where the masonry massing is expressed out to the corner would be more successful. We also feel the 4th floor needs refinement in this location. As best seen on page A20, the top of the parapet is most visible from a pedestrian standpoint and currently appears very blank and tall. We would suggest reducing the parapet's height or introducing enhanced detailing. Moving around to the Cumberland Street elevation, we feel the extreme lightness of the porches creates too many voids and reads too horizontal. Since this building is expressed in brick, we would encourage introducing more solidity and articulation to the porch frames, similar to the treatment of the State Street elevation. We commend the project team for integrating the existing historic buildings and in particular showcasing the Martian Building, which is a rare example of historic Art Deco architecture in Charleston. We feel the new design nicely frames and relates to the historic building. However, we are greatly concerned by how far forward the new building encroaches on the historic structure. Best seen on page A30, there is little relief given to the front of the Art Deco building, and the new construction should be set further back to allow more of its historic form to read on the streetscape. Finally, on the Lingard Street elevation, we feel the framing at the top floor is too heavy and presents too much height at this interior portion of the block. Ideally, we feel the frame should be eliminated, but would at a minimum recommend studying a more trellis-like recessed top floor treatment. Overall, we are encouraged by this project and believe it will be a positive contribution to this area, but feel deferral would be the best course of action to allow refinements to the design and in particular, address massing concerns about how the new building engages with the historic Martian Building. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Any further live public comment?
Yes, I am seeing Mr. Justin Schwebler here.
Okay.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. We would like to thank the applicants for meeting with us to review the designs prior to tonight's meeting. This is a complex site in an architecturally sensitive part of the peninsula. HCF has been supportive through the rezoning process for this redevelopment, and we're excited to see the residential use in this part of the city. Having an appropriately scaled and activated corner with the residential and commercial uses at Cumberland and State Street will be a great benefit to the neighborhood. While we're generally supportive of the overall architectural direction and height, we have some concerns with the massing and its impact on the historic Martian Building. The view down Philadelphia Alley is one of the most visited and photographed streetscapes in the city. We find that it's incredibly important to retain the prominence of the Martian Building as the terminus of that viewshed. While we are supportive of the architectural direction for the building, we believe that the second and third story projected bays over the Martian Building should be pushed back flush with the rest of the facade. This will help to reduce the visual impact of the new structure as the backdrop to the Martian Building and maintain the generous relief that is expressed on the east and west sides of the historic facade. We also feel that it's important to maintain the historic signage of the building. If this setback is established, we would be happy to support the application for conceptual approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Further live public comment?
No more live public comment. Mr. Chair, there is a letter that was received late that I don't know if you want to read. It's from the adjacent property.
If it was, I'm familiar with that letter and the
And
substance.
y'all,
of
I
that
think you
letter.
all have received it. So
Yeah. Oh, we have not?
I think you all have probably
Yeah, we
received.
did. And so I think it's incorporated into the record. And my recollection of that letter is that the neighbor is supportive, but there aren't a ton of details that relate to the architecture in that regard, other than thinking it fits in well. So I think that covers that.
I think so.
Very good. City staff comments and recommendations.
Okay. Number one, the east-facing State Street facade is the most successful of the project, incorporating vertical proportions, a taller ground floor, a recessed penthouse, and detailing which includes fluted metal panels, brick reveals, and a rhythmic layered framework, which harmonizes with its neighbor to the north, the Luttrell Hotel. At the east facade, incorporate a similar recessed frame about the fixed panels at the first floor in order to visually thicken the pilasters to match the appearance of these at the second and third floors. While the indented corner at the southeast evokes traditional Charleston corner storefronts, the scale of this project and the corner column do not match. The corner column should be omitted in lieu of a cantilever corner or made more robust. The south-facing Cumberland Street facade is a language of voids created by an abundance of balconies. This skeletal language is out of character with surrounding Charleston buildings, which are more solid or opaque with punched openings, and it may be too much in contrast with the saved Martian Building. 5. The wide spans of the balcony porches on the south elevation, while interrupted with a single column, read horizontally rather than with wood proportions. The brick pilasters are pulled apart and provide minimal solid surface and mass to this elevation. Continue the band between the second and third floors of the east facade and southeast corner by incorporating it into the south facade to better tie these elevations together. And 7, at the north facing Lingard Street portion, the extended framework to encompass the pool deck Feels like a different expression, especially with closing the curtains. Structure to encompass the pool deck should be recessed and lightened instead. And our recommendation is deferral with board and staff comments for massing of solid void language and for more cohesiveness in the architectural language between elevations.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Parrish. Mr. Bello, you have the opportunity to respond or clarify.
Okay, well, yes, well, first, thank you to the preservation groups and to city staff for having the time to meet with us and go through their concerns and our design. So a couple of things, I won't hit all of those, but I think the couple of key things that I took from that is one, the Lingard Street elevation, there's an issue with that extra frame. And I think that's a relatively easy thing to solve. I don't know that we disagree. I don't think that height on that street is an issue as much as just how it's articulated at that top portion. And so whether that's pulled back or it's a different material or whatever, I think that's a relatively simple thing to solve. The comment about pushing the area back behind directly on axis with the Martian Building by both preservation groups mentioned that. I completely understand that comment. I mean, you want to push it back as far as possible. I think that's, of course, it's a historic building, but I think that's difficult. Obviously, from our side, we need the room, but I think it's not just programmatic. I think we got to remember we don't have our building up on the street on either side of that. We have pushed the entire mass and left two relatively large open areas on either side of the Martian Building. And again, I would argue if you stand out there, that's going to have a much greater impact what you actually see from the street than whether that building is pushed back behind it. Again, I don't disagree. It would be, everything pushed back is better, but I don't know that you're going to have that much of an improvement, I guess, in their concern. I will say too, we could have just had a continuous flat facade behind it and just kind of ignored that building. And we intentionally, tried to address that building in our facade. So there's a little bit of that as well. So I think we kind of disagree with that one. And then the last one, which I think is the biggest issue from our side, is the comment about Cumberland Street feeling like there's too many voids. And I think the challenge there is, well, yeah, it's because we have porches there. We don't have mass. So I think the good part of that is we wanted it to feel lighter on Cumberland. Cumberland's a different street and state, especially at that corner. We didn't want it to feel super heavy. And so I think to me, the issue may be in how those porches are articulated in terms of proportions, which I think is kind of what city staff was mostly focusing on, the proportions and how you carry that across. I think it's okay if the elevations read slightly different because they're going to be different. There's a porch on one side and there's not on the other. But to us, it's more about maybe, again, board may disagree, but it's more about how do we get those proportions a little bit more in tune with what's happening on the other side. So I would ask, and so those are my only responses. I would ask though the board to look at the project in its entirety. It's a very complex site. There's a lot going on, and I would ask the board to take a look at sort of the totality of the project. I think we can address the proportions of those porches to address city comments. And I think preservation groups, or one of the groups had a comment about that. And I think it's fairly easy to resolve the Lingard. I don't see that as something that couldn't be resolved. Both of those we're hoping could be resolved at the preliminary level. So those are my responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bello. We'll now move to board discussion and vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about this project?
Well, I'll start off. I recognize the architectural motif that's underway here, using masonry, but pursuing lightness, and I don't think that's inappropriate. If the building were more typical for this industrial area with solid masonry walls and punch windows, it would probably overwhelm the historic structures that it surrounds. I think the one part about it that I really do think needs study is those porches. The egg crate effect that can develop from a bunch of recessed porches can be, it's hard to work with that in Charleston languages. And I think that is an area that definitely needs study. I'm a little surprised, typically, this applicant's projects come with very little public comment or staff comment. So I'm a little surprised by the extent and severity of both. There's nothing really to do about that other than I've been looking at Mr. Bellows' camera to make sure there's not somebody with a gun behind him. It's forcing him to do this, but I think considering the extent of the comments, and I don't know what my fellow board members might say, but considering this extent of staff comment and public comment, much of which I think can be resolved, but it probably does point towards a deferral in this case, in my view.
Thank you, Mr. White. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any additional comment.
I would just say, for the benefit of Mr. Bello, that I think the eastern facade is very successful, and I like the presentation. I like to step down into the neighborhood. I think that's the closest to any expression to finality. And I guess I will be sure to go look at that perspective from Philadelphia Alley. One thing that I would note for the benefit of Mr. Bello is that when you are at street level in front of these historic facades, the street is so narrow that I have some questions about how much of the new construction and addition that we're going to see if you're just walking down the street. I will say that for his benefit, but also go back to look at this view from Philadelphia Alley looking onto the Martian Building. Further board comments?
Well, it's just the three of us. So,
Well, I didn't know if anybody wanted to have a second round.
Oh,
Hearing none, can I entertain a motion?
sure. I'll enter one for deferral with board and staff comments.
Mr. White, your motion, as I understand it, is for a deferral of this project incorporating board and staff comments.
That's correct.
So I'll proceed to call. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Or in the motion? Yay in favor of the motion for deferral. Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor of deferral. Mr. Bello, continue working with us and the groups on the items mentioned, and we'll do some homework on our part as well, and we will look forward to seeing you present on this in the future.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Agenda item number 3 has been withdrawn. Agenda item number 4.
Right. That agenda item is 176 and 186 Concord Street. Request for final approval of a mock-up for the new construction of a hotel in the French Quarter, where the height district is 56 and 30V, and this is in the Old City District. A little context, if you will. Bendu Range is on the south. I'm sorry, we didn't quite coordinate that one. And then that's Concord going north-south. An image from Bendu and Concord. And with this one, we'll have Mr. Nathan Schutte. Nathan, I'm promoting you right now.
Excellent. Good afternoon, and thank you, Ms. Parrish. So Nathan Schutte with McMillan Pasden Smith, architect at 121 Calhoun Street. I'm presenting tonight on behalf of the design, construction, and development team who are also listening into this conversation. I do want to thank the staff who met with us a couple of times through this process, and then again yesterday along with some board members to review the mock-up in person. I'm going to try to walk you through this relatively quickly. In our submittal package, we attempted to show you the mock-up itself and try to relate it to various aspects of the building and the different conditions that you will see in its ultimate construction. Lawrence, next slide, please. The mock-up is composed, we're using 3 of the elevations, if you will, in various different manners. You'll see kind of overviews of them on this slide. Next slide, please. So on the west side of the mock-up, we did a small vignette, partially scaled, partially not. The actual size of the elements are real. We just compressed them here, and they'll be set much higher in the side. We've got the steel canopy along with its infill constructed here to the west. Go ahead to the next slide. The building itself has a series of different detailings. We've got a base stucco detailing. We've got fenestration within that stucco, but we also have retail and then these fairly detailed porch or infilled porch conditions. This is an outside corner vignette of that porch condition. You can see some of it in the rendering here on the left. So the lowest portions of this, everything at grade, sort of tactile touch and feel part of it is constructed here in wood as we choreographed with the board along the way. The upper elements are a hybrid. The horizontal cornices are GFRC with some GFRC sills. The columns remain, well, the pilasters in this portion of it are wood. There'll be another portion I'll talk about here in a moment that we do have some GFRC columns. And again, I'm going to kind of do this quickly. You'll see some of the details from the set, hopefully associating them to what you're looking at. Next slide. This is more focused at the stucco itself, particularly a punched opening. The window openings have a little bit more than a 4-inch return in the stucco. We've choreographed the struck joints in the stucco system to align with the edges and the head of the windows, provide the returns we were looking for. Been working with the manufacturer. We've got the panning in here the way we wanted it in the cast stone sill. We think this has come together pretty nicely. And we did include on the mock-up the lantern that you'll see at the entrances around the base of the building. Next slide, please. The balcony was a bit of an adventure. Kudos to the construction team and the fabricators to help us navigate all of this, but we were able to build this with one minor tweak as intended. So we were able to keep all of the clean lines that we'd previously discussed. The flat panel, the attachment to the building, the concealed fasteners. We do have an unfinished Ipe deck on this. You'll see we've got the same treatment. This is a very, very small door, but it is a door as you would have it out to the balconies. As well, we did install one of the shutters along with the full set of operable hardware as it will be on the building up here as well. Next slide. At the ground level, that balcony sits immediately above some of our retail conditions. Most of the facade along Concord Street are these retail window systems. This is all wood up until you get to the horizontal GFRC profile, fully set back with the sills and sill extensions. Very happy with the way this turned out. I will note this element, this detailing does occur in 2 places on the building, not in the green. So all of Concord Street is in this dark Charleston green. There's a couple of corners, particularly along the river walk on the south and north end where this detailing is done in white. Next page.
Architectural review is hearing a request for final approval to demolish the International Longshoremen's Association Hall. But there are some people who are against that. Lauren Quinlan explains why some people oppose.
That's Aaron.
Hold on for just a moment. We'll see where that's coming from. Muted out.
I got it.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. I'm not presenting that demolition of that building. No. I'm going to stick with my mock-up tonight. We did on the east portion of the mock-up construct effectively a top level porch for the porch over porch component, showing the inside corner of the GFRC, particularly at the top of the building, the detailing, the wood rail I mentioned earlier. The round column in this particular portion of the vignette is a GFRC column. All of our round columns and round pilasters will be GFRC on the project. None of that occurs at the ground level. Those are all elevated conditions. Next slide, please. To kind of touch on this quickly, we did include the materials that we will have at the base of the building and around this building. This did include a little bit of a study into mortar colors. On the left-hand edge, you'll see kind of 3 runs of brick. Those each had a different mortar color set into them. Our on the far left, we included in this. We did test that. We on the mock way. This ultimately being the culmination of what we think the right direction forward is. I'm happy to answer any questions. I did that fairly quickly, and I appreciate the time on site yesterday, and look forward to bringing this project to a reality. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Any live public comment?
For this one, we have no public comment or speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. City staff comments or recommendations?
Not very much. Our comment is basically that the shutter hinges are located on the wall instead of on the window jamb, and we wanted to confirm operability. And then we are recommending approval of the mock-up with board and staff comments.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Parrish. And if you know right now, Nathan, you can respond to that comment in your response time. If not, that's okay too. We'll sort it out.
I can attest that it works.
Okay, that's okay. That'll do.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Board comments and a potential vote.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question for Nathan.
Sure.
So I was not there yesterday. I went by today. And the gutter that is on the, I guess that would be the east side, it was faceted instead of just a half round. And I'm just wondering, is that the way it would be? Like it was a piece of copper that was bent in, 1/4-inch bends, and not like a real head. That it right there in the top right. I mean, it may be just because they didn't have a half round gutter to use and they just put it in a break or something and bent it. But I was just interested.
That's an interesting catch, James, because I believe the profile would actually be a rolled condition. I'll verify that. It only occurs once on the building. But
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Okay, very good. That's pretty good for Mr. Metters with a mock-up. I was reminded him yesterday. I didn't realize he'd been back by there, and I thought Nathan had gotten a complete pass. But Hawkeye is looking at your mock-ups. Further board comments.
I agree that it's nice to have a mock-up that doesn't require much comment. And just reading between the lines, I'm sure that it was a journey to get to this point, which I appreciate.
Yeah, the workmanship on the mock-up was very good. Just a couple of minute details that we were on site and that he's familiar with. Very good. Can I entertain a motion from the board?
I make a motion for approval.
There'd be a motion for approval of the mock-up incorporating board and staff comments.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, in a second.
I'll second that.
All right. I believe Ms. Sobchak can vote on this agenda item, so I'm going to let her vote. How do you vote on this item, Ms. Sobchak?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters,
Yay in favor.
Mr. White,
Yay in favor.
and myself, yay in favor, passes 4-0. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5.
All right, this one is 110 Calhoun Street, requesting conceptual approval of the Emmanuel 9 Memorial Survivors Garden and site improvements. This one's in the Garden District and in the Old and Historic District. Got you a little context here. This is Street, going from the lower left to the top right, and Henrietta Street is 1 block to the north. And then we've got a straight view from Calhoun of the Mother Emanuel Church. Looking northeast. And then looking west on Calhoun Street. And looking east. All right, and then with this one, we have Scott Parker, he's promoted. Michael Irad, he is promoted, and Kimberlyn Davis.
Very good. Who would like to lead off for
Ready
that?
to go on?
Yes, is Kimberlyn here? Kim? Maybe.
Kimberlyn hasn't.
He's
Oh, there she is.
here.
Hi, how are you?
Great. You
Good.
Going to lead off for the presenters this evening?
Perfect, thank you. As you guys know, the night of June 17, 2015 is one that we won't forget. As we settled in for the evening, Dylan Roof made his way through a side entrance of the Mother Emanuel AME Church in downtown Charleston and gunned down 5 clergy and 4 church members, including the Honorable Reverend Clemente Pinckney, during Bible study. In the months after the massacre, community leaders came together to form a nonprofit called the Mother Emanuel Memorial Foundation, with the goal of building a national memorial to remember the 9 lives taken, who are known as the Emanuel 9, honor the 5 survivors, and embrace the historical significance of the church and community, and serve as a cornerstone of civic engagement. This memorial, known as the Emanuel 9 Memorial, will be on the grounds of the historic Mother Emanuel AME Church. And since the tragedy, visitors come to the church every day to pay their respects to those who were murdered and stand in solidarity with the church. There is a human need to grieve the horrific acts of violence that happened on that day, but there's also a need to use a sacred space to help others learn to stand down hate and come together to create a more equitable country where racism no longer exists. And so we were here a few years ago, and we were here from a conceptual perspective, and now we wanted to come back to you guys as we have continued to refine the design of the memorial. And with that came with increased size of the memorial slightly. We've got our designer on, as well as Michael Wrought, as well as Scott Parker. So Michael, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Kim. Hi, my name is Michael Wrought from Handel Architects in New York City, and thank you for seeing us today. We last saw you in 2018 for your prior approval. If you could advance the slides, please. I wanted to share a couple of images with you of the existing context. Next, please. Next. Next, this is the rear of the church, and here you can see the facades. Sorry, advance. You can see the backside of the 2 Charleston singles, and here on the top, you can see the view along Calhoun Street as well as along Henrietta Street. Next, please. A couple of more images of the context. Next. And next, please. So one of the first questions we had as we struggled with this design was where we would actually place the memorial. As you can see, the church is currently surrounded by parking on 3 sides, to the east, west, and north. Next, please. And we looked at the sort of the Charleston vernacular idiom of churches surrounded by brick walls, and we thought, could we figuratively reframe and elevate the church grounds by creating a wall that would surround the church grounds on 3 sides, to the east, west, and north. And in doing so, create a space for a memorial courtyard to the west of the church and the survivors garden to the east of the church behind those 2 Charleston singles. Next, please. When we last presented to you, that wall was shown as 9 feet tall. In conversations with the TRC and the design review committee, we've reduced the height of that to 8 feet at the memorial courtyard, 7 feet at the survivors garden, and 5 feet directly behind the church. Next, please. Next. This is a view in plan of the existing conditions on the left and the proposed conditions on the right. As Kimberly noted, when we last presented to you, the memorial courtyard was slightly smaller than what you're seeing here today. We've had some conversations with our neighbors to the west, Citadel Baptist Church, and are in the process of purchasing a lot off of Henrietta Street from them to allow for a parking lot that's slightly larger. And more importantly, they're granting us a 12-foot easement to the west of the memorial courtyard, which has really significantly changed the feel of the memorial courtyard. By adding those 12 feet, it's a more civically spaced public realm, which is something that's been very important to us. Although this is on private ground, we do see this as a very public-facing mission. And so being able to create a civically scaled space here for the memorial has been very helpful. Next, please. So as I mentioned before, you can see the memorial courtyard to the left of the page, to the west, the survivors garden to the east, the church in the middle, and the two Charleston singles at 104 and 106 Calhoun Street on the bottom right, and then the parking lot off of Henrietta Street. So we are maintaining two curb cuts on Henrietta, but eliminating those two curb cuts on Calhoun Street. Next, please. I'll start by showing a few images of the memorial courtyard. Next. So these are the dimensions of the space, roughly 120 feet by 50 feet in size. Next. And the memorial courtyard at its very center is the names fountain. It's an oval, or I should say ovate shaped vessel made from a single piece of marble. Its rim will be inscribed with the names of the Emmanuel Nine. The water is actually emanates from a cut at the bottom of the bowl shaped like a cross and flows over the rim across the names, and then is sort of pulled back down on the underside of that bowl and is recirculated at night. We imagine that cut in the bowl, the cross will be illuminated. We've been working with Pentagram, with Michael Beirut from Pentagram, on designing a font that will be used for this inscription, and that sort of Gothic black letter font that you saw on the cover page for this presentation is the font that he developed, inspired by the calligraphy and the stained glass windows of the church. So that is not seen here, but it is in development. Next. This is another view of that bench. The two fellowship benches, which flank the names fountain, one is about 80 feet in length, the other 60 feet in length. We are working with a structural engineer named Guy Nordenson to develop that. We are looking at actually a self-supporting masonry structure here. The back of the larger bench is going to be composed of 13 very large pieces of marble, which are actually interlocking to prevent lateral motion. And so they really rely on each other for support, which seemed very appropriate for the fellowship bench. And this space itself is really sort of an outdoor analog for the church itself. It's an outdoor sanctuary, a congregational space, a place for gathering. Next. We are working with Carlton Simmons, Phil Simmons' nephew, on the design of wrought iron gate that will be the front piece and entrance off of Calhoun Street into the memorial courtyard. What is shown here is not is a placeholder. We think it looks good as a placeholder, but really we're working with Carlton to create something that is unique that he will develop himself over the course of the next year. Next, please. And this image is just past that gate as you enter the memorial courtyard. The church tower is to your right. And in the distance, you can see our neighboring church to the north, the brick walls, which will be clad in fig ivy and lined with crepe myrtle trees. Next, please. At the far northwest corner of the site, we're imagining a more quiet and private space for contemplation. We're calling this the Contemplation Base, and it came from a request from one of the parishioners involved in the selection of the design to create a complement to that sort of larger congregational space. It's really seen as a place of gathering. This was seen as a place for sort of quiet prayer and reflection, a place where you could sit or kneel and be apart from that larger gathering space, but still within it. Next, please. These images are from the model that we actually presented to you in person back in 2018, and they show that sort of that narrow courtyard prior to the additional 12 feet in width that I had mentioned earlier. This model also shows a series of bollards along Calhoun Street. We've been in discussion with Tori and with the design review committee. We've heard their apprehensions about these bollards, and we are scaling down the number of bollards to a handful that will be located directly at the gate, but not elsewhere, as shown here. Next, please. A view of that model from a couple years ago. Next, please. And then a very important component of this design is a survivor's garden. It's really a complement to the courtyard. If the courtyard is solemn, the survivor's garden is meant to have a very different feel to it. Next, please. So you can see the dimensions of that garden. It's very much defined by 5 live oak trees, 1 for each of the survivors, and 6 benches, 1 for each survivor and 1 additional bench to honor the church itself as a survivor. Next, please. And these are a couple of views which still show that 9-foot high wall. That wall has now been reduced to 7 feet in height here. You can see the marble benches, each one will be inscribed, and you can see the live oak trees. To your left, you can see a path leading north towards the parking lot in Henrietta Street, and I'll touch on that in a second. And to your right, you can see the back of those 2 Charleston singles. Next, please. And this is another view looking both south and west. I'm sorry, yes, west. So you can see Calhoun Street on the left-hand side there, the rear side of the 2 Charleston singles, and the side of the church. Next, please. So as I mentioned earlier, there's that path that leads past the survivor's garden going north towards Henrietta Street. And there's actually a marker in the sidewalk of Henrietta Street honoring Septima Clark, the civil rights leader. Her childhood home was there, and it felt very fortuitous that the path that we wanted to create here, which serves many other purposes, happened to coincide with the location of that marker. So we're calling it Septima's Path. That marker, we hope, will be elevated onto a low brick wall, which Scott can tell you a little bit more about. That is part of the improvements along Henrietta Street. We will have different paving material as that path crosses the parking lot. And then if you can go next, please, you can see how that path serves the new entrance to the fellowship hall, the elevator to the 2nd floor, and 106 Calhoun Street. So it sort of aggregates a lot of the pedestrian flow that we're imagining will be through the site. Next, please. Then finally, we have a small area directly to the right of 104 Calhoun Street. There is talk in the future of perhaps turning that into a visitor center. So this is really almost a visitor's garden of sort with some movable furniture. And it's, you know, a small part of the design, but as it is so, it is right on Calhoun Street. We've paid some attention to its design. We're imagining decomposed granite underfoot and some crepe myrtle trees and movable furniture here. Next, please. And then an elevation along Calhoun Street. You can see this plan predates our discussions with the city regarding the bollard location and the reduction in their number. Next. Like to pass the baton to Scott right now, please.
So I'll be very brief. These are some images of precedent images of both the garden walls that will surround the church, as well as the landscape and treatment that will be used, the crepe myrtles and other local traditional plants and paving materials. Next, please. And again, the live oaks for the survivor's garden and the plantation mix or gravel paving. Thank you. Next one. Michael started with the walls that will surround the church grounds and really create a sacred space there, or help create that. And we looked at other walls for churches on the peninsula as inspiration. Next, please.
These photos are from a recent visit to the marble quarry that we are working with. It's located in the Italian Alps, and you can see some of the blocks which are indicative of the type of material that we will be using for the fellowship benches and for the names fountain, and a carved sample of the rim of that names fountain right here. Next, please. And just to mention again, our work with Carlton Simmons, very close to our site is this beautiful gate that's on the left at St. John's. We're not looking to duplicate that, but really to be inspired by something along those lines for the main entrance into the memorial courtyard. Next, please. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you again, and we're welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you.
Real quick, if I could, I wanted to add one more thing. With regard to the site plan itself, Michael mentioned the additional area for the main courtyard to the west. To the north, as shown in the plan, there's a small area that is actually over the boundary of an adjoining property. There's some negotiations going on to perhaps acquire that property. If those negotiations are not successful, we can slightly move the wall back where the contemplation basin is. And it would not adversely affect the conceptual design. It would just be a slight change in the wall in the back left corner. Just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, and thank you to the design team for a great presentation. Public comment.
See here, we have Miss Erin Minigan. We'll start with Erin.
Thank you. Erin Minigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. Prior to the initial review of this project in 2018, the Preservation Society had the opportunity to meet with Pastor Manning and the project team to discuss this proposal. And we were honored to lend our support to this important effort to recognize and remember the Emmanuel 9, the survivors and their families. We are pleased to once again offer our support and congratulate the Emmanuel AME congregation on their continued progression of the design that we feel rises to the challenge of memorializing the site while engaging sensitively with the historic church building. We are glad to see this project move forward and recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minigan. Further public comment.
Mr. Justin Schrebler.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. HCF is encouraged and excited to see this project moving forward again. We're fully supportive of the application and look forward to the establishment of this fitting memorial to the Emmanuel 9 and Survivors Garden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Further public comment.
All right, and then we had one more, but the judgment is that she signed up for the wrong meeting and I do not see her in the meeting. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. City staff comments or recommendations.
Sure. Number one, the series of bollards which appear in the plans and renderings are within the purview of the DRC and not of this board. The applicant is aware of discussions regarding these. Two, the design has been well received by all who have seen it. And three, the board needs to determine how much of the sample material palette and workmanship they wish to see as samples or on site. We are recommending conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Tori. Any response from the applicant? Anyone on the applicant's team?
None here. Thank you.
Okay. Board discussion and a vote on this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, James, sorry.
Michael, your presentation was great. Thank you. Appreciate the thoroughness, the effort that you put into it, and that of course includes all of your team. It's going to be very difficult to have samples done of this. I think maybe it's appropriate to ask Michael what he thinks about samples.
Okay, very good.
So we are currently actually erecting a mock-up of the fellowship bench in Italy. It will be ready in a few weeks, and you're invited to come see it. It's substantial in size. It's full scale and about 8 feet across and 9 feet high. We would be happy to provide we are sending samples to Charleston of the marble and the finish that we're selecting, of the slate paving, obviously the brick for the walls. So, it's hard to create a mock-up that is scaled and is right material in this case. So perhaps either a video conference from the site of the mock-up, or photographs can be submitted to you in lieu of a mock-up on site.
Thank you for that, and I'm comfortable with that.
I am as well. I would just say, given the logistical challenges that we have, I think the applicant saying they in good faith will provide what models, materials, and mock-ups are reasonably available to them along with photographs is good enough, given the nature of this project.
And so, Mr. Chairman, I have one more question.
Yes, sir.
And Tori, you answered this, but so the bollards are not under this jurisdiction of BAR.
So they are in the right of way, and they will be seen by DRC, and Michael and Scott and everyone know we have been discussing these at length. Parks, Jason Kronsberg, there's been a lot of discussion on those.
So Michael, you had very good words about each of the different components. What's the thought on the ballots? Why were they incorporated into the design?
Why? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last word. What was
Why were they incorporated into the design? What did they represent?
the bollards?
Yes.
They were really mostly incorporated as a security measure because of the width of the entrance gate into the memorial courtyard.
Okay, that's great. That's what I guessed. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Further board comments?
Well, I think it's a fantastic proposal. It's, things like this are special conditions. And I have seen special conditions projects come before previous BARs and get a bunch of like wackadoodle public comments. So this is really nice to see the community backing up what is really a wonderful proposal. I can go ahead just for expediency's sake and introduce a motion, Mr. Chairman, if that.
Sure.
All right, I'll go ahead and move for conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
That is Mr. White's motion for conceptual approval with board and staff comments. Is there a second?
I second it.
All right. I'll proceed to call the roll. Mr. White, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay, in favor. And I apologize. I totally forgot that Luda was not recusing for this item. I'm sorry if I cut you off from commentary.
That's okay.
No, that's all right. I'm just thrilled to see and really interested in the design and this public art, which I'm still thinking about in Charleston. And an unfortunate reason for it, but it's wonderfully done, and looking forward to see it in execution.
Thank you, Luda. And I'll take that as a yay in favor.
Yeah. Yes. Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters.
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Passes unanimously. Thank you and congratulations to the design team. We'll continue to look forward to working with you on this project to completion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 6.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Muted. This one is 810 Meeting Street, the Flatiron Building. The request is final approval for construction of a hotel with mixed use elements, East Central Neighborhood, Historic Corridor District. Some context here. We've got Morrison Drive on the right side of the page going up to the left top, Meeting Street. This project sits right where these two streets merge or intersect. And then we've got a photo looking south on Meeting Street with the site right there in the center. And then another one looking into the project site there from Meeting. Looking south on Morrison with the site to your right. And then we're in the intersection looking north with the project would be on your right. All right, with this one, we have Mr. Steve Ramos. And I believe that's it. Well, and Kara Brower. I believe they must be in the same room. And I have, I'm trying to elevate Steve. There he comes. Okay. Just a minute. Steve keeps disappearing. Okay, we have him.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
We can, Mr. Ramos, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Steve Ramos with LS3P, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague Kira Brower. And we are presenting the Flatiron Building for the Montfort Group, the owners of this development. It's been 2 years since we were last here, believe it or not. And although it's not unusual for commercial development to take a long time, if you throw in a pandemic, that certainly makes things a little more complex. But we are extremely excited to be back. We hope to get a shovel in the ground this year and move along what we believe to be a really transformative project. So we're just really stoked to be back. This is the final BAR request. I'd like to just start by talking about the commentary from the previous BAR meeting. And if you could go to, I think it's the third slide. One more. Perfect. That's an old rendering on the left from preliminary BAR. And there are 12 comments on the right that were from that meeting. The comments that are in bold and underlined, those are all of the comments that required some sort of action and response from our team. And if you go to the next slide, we have kind of extrapolated those comments and provided responses for them. And so I'm going to just talk through this slide. I promise that I'll probably skip about 60 of the 70 slides, but this one I want to make sure that we highlight. The comment number 3 says FRP has been eliminated in favor of GFRC. Heads and sills should also be GFRC rather than stucco. That comment was referring to the punched windows that are kind of in the center of that rendering. We were previously showing those headers and sills as stucco, and it was commented that that's not an ideal material. So instead, we have changed those to be GFRC per the comment. Comment number 4, stucco should be limited to vertical wall surfaces only. What that was speaking to, we had a number of elements on the facade, such as the headers and the sills, the vertical columns on the round corner, as well as some of the panelized sections of the building where we were making a lot of the details with stucco. And it was commented that that's not the best use for stucco. It's a good wall material, but not exactly ideal for ins and outs and lots of corners. So we have changed that per the comments, particularly the columns that you see on the corner, the white columns. Those are now metal panel. That way we can get nice crisp corners. Also, on the left side of the rendering, we have these vertical panelized portions of the facade, which again were being done with different colors of stucco. Those have been predominantly changed to aluminum. So we have this kind of common material from bottom to top in those recessed panels. And so that's both comments 4, 5, and 6. So we have addressed those stucco details, most of which will now be made out of metal, which will greatly simplify the facade, as well as be better in terms of keeping water out. And then comment number 11 and 12, those had to do with hardscape on the design, just providing more drawings and details, which we have provided. From this point, I'm going to have you skip through a whole bunch of slides. So you can start just kind of moving through the presentation. We have updated renderings that we've included. They look very similar to the previous renderings. It is really just some of the details that have been refined. Subtle things like cornice profiles, we've further studied them. But overall, the design is the same as it was prior. And you can just keep moving through. This will be the south facade. You know, we've taken a lot of consideration into what the building looks like from a distance, knowing that this is a building that will be very prominent upon entrance to Charleston. And so the very top of the building has a very ornate metal screen because we felt like the top of the building is very important here, and we wanted it to be as clean and tidy as possible. So that screen up there will start to hide a lot of the clutter that just always exists on the top of an urban building. Next. The overall site plan. Next. And these are all of the floor plan comparisons. There are really just subtle changes to the interiors that, again, are subtle and have not had any sort of real impact on the facade. You can just cycle through these plans. Yeah, and you can just keep moving through. Next. Yeah, and you can keep moving through to the elevations, please.
And I am going as quickly as I can.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was slow on our end. These are the same floor plans, just at a larger scale, so that you can see more detail. But again, there are no changes of any substance to these plans from the previous BAR. So we have the comparison elevations as well as enlarged elevations. You know, there's just further definition of materials. All of the changes that are listed in the comments are captured both in elevation as well as in detail. These are just enlarged drawings for the various recessed entrances we have. We have both an entrance and an exit for vehicles. And we very much designed those as outdoor rooms. And we've wrapped the exterior material palette into those openings. We will also have nice brick pavers in those areas, as well as recessed coffers at the ceilings. These are drawings for the entrance to the building. That would be the main pedestrian entrance into the building. Building section. And here are just enlarged details of the various facade elements. Just as a reminder, there is a granite water table to the building. And then the tall columns that you see are precast, and the entablature is precast. The nice thing about that is we can get very large pieces. So those columns can be one single piece. And then we also have the glass brick columns that are flanking the entrance. Next. Here are some enlarged details of the panels at the storefront. There you can see the cornice for the building. It's actually a very substantial size. So it's appropriately scaled to the size of the building. Next. Here are further enlarged details of those column details where you can see the granite that is at the base of the building. Next. Just more details. There's a detail of one of the canopies that you see there. Next. We have a pretty elaborate glass and metal canopy at the main entrance. Next. And here are some of those details, as well as the cornice. Next. This is probably the most unique detail on the building that we're building or constructing these columns out of glass, glass brick, which we've learned to be actually more structurally stable than concrete. But they're actually just a veneer. The structure will be within the columns, but really excited about this particular detail. Next. Next. The detail on the bottom right, that's one of the columns that is at the round corner. This is one of the details that was previously clad in stucco. You guys asked us to rethink that, and we felt like metal panel was a nice material for that corner. It also gives it a contemporary feel to the building. Next. And then this was one of the substantial changes. If you look at that 3D image in the middle, all of those ins and outs were previously being done by stucco, as I've mentioned, but now we have a metal slab edge cover. We've extended the storefront from slab to slab, and the vertical fins, which again were stucco, we're now using a vertical, it's actually an aluminum sunscreen element that will be integral to the storefront. It'll be a much more cohesive design and just a better building envelope. Next. And just some more details that are up at the very top of the building. You can see that laser cut aluminum screen that will be hiding all of the accoutrement at the top of the building. Next. You can see these are all profiles that are going to be made out of GFRC, which is a molded product. It's very weather resistant and also very structurally stable. Next. Next. Just one of the last details, I mentioned that the headers and the sills of the windows were previously stucco, and now we are making those out of GFRC. which again is a molded product. And it's made to look like stone. That's the look that it will have. Next. Just some, back in the day, we would bring materials to the meeting. And we have to get a little more creative now. We have 3 basic colors for the building. The majority of it will be that kind of bone white color. The metal will have 2 different tones. We have like a champagne color and a bronze color. And then at the base of the building, we have a gray precast. And then at the water table, we have a granite. And then of course, the glass brick, which only occurs in just one location. Next. This is the last slide I'll show. Again, we are, well, just really excited to be back after such a long time. It's a real honor to follow Michael Ared and his team on the Emanuel 9 Memorial. And just another reminder of what a privilege it is to work in Charleston. And so we are here to ask for final BAR approval. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Steve. Public comments, Ms. Parrish.
This one we have Mr. Justin Schwebler.
Yes, thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. We're glad to see this application come back before the board. HCF would like to recommend final approval for the application. We feel that this project will be a landmark building for this district and helps to set a precedent of high quality architecture for the surrounding area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. Further live public comment.
That's all for the public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. City staff comments and recommendations.
Sure.
They look pretty light.
I'll start reading since there's a lot of photographs here. Number 1 is this submission has addressed the previous staff and board comments and board motion, and the project continues to evolve well. We are recommending final approval with board and staff comments with final review by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Any response, Mr. Ramos? Certainly don't have to.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Board discussion and a vote on this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask Steve one quick question.
Sure.
At some point in time during the process, there was some conversation about the glass brick or glass blocks being illuminated with lights from behind. I might be misremembering that, but that's not part of this application anymore, is it?
It is, yes. So we still do plan, or let me clarify, we would like to illuminate those columns. Obviously it's a unique thing. I think that's something we would mock up on a small scale, but it is something we feel like would even more elaborate what will be a really stunning and unique feature.
I don't remember how that was left previously in comments, but with the exception of that for me, Steve, as you know from the beginning, I thought this was a great project, and I think it will be certainly contribute to this area and be extremely well received by everybody coming to Charleston. But I do have a question about the illumination of the glass blocks. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Matters. Further board comments.
I remember that that was when Dennis was still working for the city, and he was concerned about the illumination of the blocks. And I remember that being a staff comment, but I seem to recall that that comment was excluded from the motion that was carried by the board. So I guess staff can just review the record and confirm that. As for me, the board member, I actually am fine with the illumination, as so long as it's not so bright that it ruins the intended effect. You're not trying to light up a parking lot. You're just trying to create a glow, I think. And beyond that, I approve. I concur with staff's recommendation for approval.
Very good. Further board comment. I'll jump in. I did not have the opportunity to comment on previous iterations of this project, but I followed it and been quite excited about it because from what I was able to glean about it, I could tell that this was a very high level project in an area of the city where you might see a bunch of value engineering and not the best materials. And this is an exceptional building that, as the other two commenters have stated, is actually going to set a very high bar for an area that needs a high bar set. So I'm appreciative to the design team for what you started with and where you ended up, and for such a high quality structure that will define that area. So thank you to the design team. Anything further before a motion or vote? Yeah, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move for final approval with board and staff comments and final review by staff.
Mr. White's motion is for final approval, incorporating board and staff comments, final review by staff. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Metters seconds. Is it just Mr. White, Mr. Metters, and myself on this? There's Luda there. I can't see her.
She's recused.
That's right. Okay. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Thank you and congratulations again to the design team. Agenda item number 7, Ms. Parrish.
Anyone else hear music?
It's me, unfortunately. I'm above the world famous blind tiger, and it's Wednesday amateur night, and I keep hitting mute, but if you want to hear me speak, you also get serenaded.
It's fine. It's not bothersome at all.
Not amateur night at the Blind Tiger.
The last item tonight is 61 Church Street. This request is final approval for the removal of failed concrete topping slab and restoration of a brownstone slab flooring at historic portico at First Baptist Church, Charleston neighborhood, constructed 1822 and in the old and historic district. Some context showing you the location. Photo from the street, from Church Street. Some Church Street photos. And we'll have Mr. Jay White, who is recusing from this item, will be presenting.
Thank you. A most unusual arrangement. Mr. White, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll be brief. This is a very small application. As you know, First Baptist is making a major investment right now in their campus by constructing a new fellowship hall and education center. And during the course of all that design work, it's frequently discussed how much the congregation dislikes the concrete topping slab that's on top of the portico floor. And if you'll advance a few slides. Let's go to looking at the existing condition photos, if we could, just to show the damage. And a couple more. So you can see the slab extends across the entire depth and breadth of the portico. Thankfully, it does not cover the stone sills, which are in actually really good condition, considering that they're built of brownstone, which is the 19th century's worst building material. And it's extensively cracked because the slab is so thin and the substrate, the brownstone itself, is so unstable. And a couple more. There, stop there. Thanks. We think that the slab was probably poured sometime between the 1950s and the late 1970s. This topping slab does show up in some circa 1977 Habs photos that are in this packet. And this was just some exploratory work that we did with a 16-ounce hammer and a cold chisel. And most of this stuff is popping right up off of the slab. So our proposal is to remove this by hand with hand tools, and then repair each stone with Jan restoration mortar, their M70 formulation, which we've used a lot at Leolio to restore brownstone in pretty much every orientation, whether it's windowsill or a step or stone flooring. And its performance, I have a lot of confidence in its performance. We did this very same thing at First Scots Presbyterian Church about 12 years ago. and it's held up very well. We don't really know exactly the condition of the stone as we're going to find it once the concrete comes up, but our expectation, and you can flip through a few more of these slides, is that we're going to chip it all up and then restore the floor without eradicating its patina. We don't want each one of these blocks to look exactly new. If there are old dents or gouges or depressions from footfall traffic that are just inherent in the stone, but the stone itself is stable, then we'll retain that profile. But where the stone is unstable, we'll again use hand tools to remove the failed brownstone and build the profile back up with the yawn. Now, if you look in those photos, you'll see that there's a concrete step that surrounds the perimeter of the portico. That was probably poured at the same time, and that whole thing is not historic. It's solid concrete, but we are proposing to just leave that where it is right now for two reasons. One, we've not really been able to discern what might have been there before that step. And two, we're trying to keep this project constrained to what can be accomplished before Easter this year, which it sounds ambitious, but I think as long as we don't run into a material availability issue, we can do it. There's a detail in the back that I sketched out that indicates the intent of it. And we also included Jan's specification for the product that we'd like to use. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. White. Public comment on this agenda item.
We'll start with Mr. Justin Schwebler.
Thank you. This is Justin Schwebler with Historic Charleston Foundation. This project represents a unique and important opportunity to restore the portico of one of the city's most prominent landmarks. We're excited to see this work carried out and are generally supportive of the application. We would prefer, however, that the brownstone blocks be used to replace the severely degraded material in kind if possible. But due to the unknown condition of the historic stone floor, we are comfortable with yawn repair as a material if needed. We would like to thank the applicants for reaching out to us prior to tonight's meeting, and we recommend approval of the application. Thank you.
And we will have Ms. Erin Minnigan.
Thank you. Erin Minnigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Preservation Society would like to thank the applicant for reaching out and sending us the submittal in advance. We are encouraged to see a proposal to restore the church to its historic appearance and support the request to remove the later concrete slab and repair the underlying brownstone paving. We believe the process outlined in the application presents a preservation sensitive approach, especially given the concrete material is easily pulling away in select areas and only hand tools are proposed to be used. We've also seen many high quality examples of brownstone repairs using yawn mortars in recent years and feel confident it can be successfully utilized in this project. We urge the board to grant final approval for this positive request to restore the brownstone flooring within the church's portico. Thank you.
Any further public comment, Ms. Perry?
That concludes the public comment.
I figured it would. Okay. City staff recommendations and comments.
The provided photographs convey the extent of the work and the condition of the topping slab, as well as how it meets the column bases. The proposed repair work is carefully planned and thorough. We're recommending final approval with board and staff comments.
Very good. Any response from the applicant?
I've actually prepared a lengthy statement in rebuttal to all of that they said, but no, I have no comments. No comments.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move to board discussion and vote on this agenda item. What does the
Mr.
board?
Chairman,
Yes,
I
sir.
went down and took a look at this, and the work should be done. And if the yawn, based on what Jay finds, he'll know immediately if he can use yawn or if you have to bring in some other material. But it definitely should be done.
Okay, very good. Further board comments.
This is Judah, and it's the same conclusion here. So, and glad that it's going to be done. So, good luck with that.
Okay.
It will be tedious, but good luck. And thank
Same
you.
here. I know it's in sympathetic hands. It was under Mr. White's stewardship. Is there a motion from the board?
Well, I'll make a move for final approval with board and staff comments.
The motion is for final approval, incorporating board staff comments. Is there a second?
I will second that.
There's been a motion and a second. I'll proceed to call the roll. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobczak?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Congratulations, Mr. White, although I don't think the result is much in doubt. Tori or Lawrence, anything for our benefit?
We don't have anything to add.
Okay,
Thank you for
very
your
good.
time tonight.
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.
I'll
Yeah.
look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good
All
evening.
right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Good evening.
Good night.